Stop the meeting. Warren Kest's voice cut across the table while I was aligning the final terms between 13 CEOs and a $2.9 billion agreement. You're done here, he said. Already turning to the room, escort her out, for a second. No one reacted. Pens paused above paper. Screens stayed open. I was still standing at the head of the table, doing the job I'd been hired to do, holding 13 global interests in balance, long enough to make trust executable. I can't believe what I just heard. Right now. All I want is to sit by the fireplace because the cold is seeping into my bones. What about where you live? What's the temperature like right now? And if you're still here, please leave your lucky number below so I know. And I think you also need to know who I am. I was the lead negotiator, not a mascot, not a slide reader. I was the one who translated risk into language executives could sign. Warren Kest was the new CEO, installed on confidence and image, convinced that authority worked best when it was public. This will move faster without her, he added, as if speed were the problem. The words landed heavy and deliberate. No explanation followed, no questions invited. This wasn't a correction. It was a display. I felt the room compress, breath shortened. The silence wasn't awkward. It was restrained. Everyone understood what this was meant to prove. Warren believed firing me in front of them would reset the hierarchy. He believed humiliation looked like leadership. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. Years in closed rooms had taught me that power feeds on reaction. I gathered myself, stepped away from the chair I had arranged, and let the moment belong to him. It didn't. No one reached for a pen. No one spoke. A CEO near the far end met my eyes and gave a small nod. Precise and unmistakable. Not sympathy, recognition of who had been holding the room together. I walked out without looking back, carrying 15 years of leverage he couldn't see. Warren Kest thought he had removed an obstacle. Before we continue, I want to be clear with you. The story you are about to hear is a blend of real workplace situations and fictional elements, with artificial intelligence used to deepen the emotional experience and help deliver the message. I hope it resonates with you. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Please rest well and take care of yourself tonight. 15 years don't disappear just because a man with a new title decides they're inconvenient. As I stood outside that room, the weight of everything I had built pressed in. Not as nostalgia, but as anger held under discipline. I had spent 15 years moving between borders, languages, and legal systems, stitching together deals that were never supposed to survive. I handled cultural missteps before they became insults, legal gaps before they became lawsuits, and trust before it turned fragile. None of that ever showed up on slides. It lived in the margins, in pauses, in knowing when not to speak. Warren Kest had never lived there. He was polished, photographed well, and repeated phrases that sounded decisive, inside the company. His rise was marketed as vision. In reality, he had never rescued a failing negotiation or sat through a night where one word could cost millions. He inherited outcomes he didn't understand. More than once, I watched him accept applause for work I had salvaged quietly. I let it happen because the deal mattered more than credit. But today, he didn't just take the credit. He erased the source. Firing me publicly wasn't strategy, it was branding. The injustice sharpened with each step away from that table. 15 years reduced to a sentence designed for optics. That was when something colder surfaced beneath the anger. I remembered the clause, the one I insisted on adding months earlier, dismissed as unnecessary safeguards. Now, it didn't feel excessive at all anymore. By the time the elevator doors closed behind me, the outrage had settled into something cleaner, colder. This was no longer about being fired. It was about what that firing actually meant. Months earlier, during the earliest drafts of the deal, I had insisted on one clause, continuity of principal liaison. I'd called it, framing it as protection for the CEO's investing time and political capital. The language was simple if the named lead negotiator was replaced or removed before final execution. All memorandums of understanding would become automatically void. Legal had pushed back. Warren waved it through. Fine, he said, distracted, already scanning the cover pages. He signed every draft without reading past the summaries, trusting that my work would carry him to applause, standing in the hallway. The memory sharpened. The clause wasn't defensive, it was structural, and Warren had just triggered it himself, inside the room. He thought he had simplified the deal. In reality, he had detonated it. Removing me didn't transfer authority. It erased the framework the agreement depended on. Every CEO at that table knew it. Even if Warren didn't, I felt the shift fully then. This wasn't loss. It was leverage activating on schedule. There was more. The memorandums waiting for signatures were not final contracts, no matter how official they looked. They required one last step to become enforceable. My step. The final digital authentication wasn't stored on any company system. It never had been. Security, Warren had said. Confident the word closed doors. It didn't touch the signature. That authentication key was bound to me personally, protected by hardware verification and legal escrow. Without it, the documents were decorative paper. Attempting to bypass it would trigger automatic alerts to external counsel. As I adjusted my bag on my shoulder, calm replaced every remaining doubt. Warren Kest believed power lived in titles and timing. I understood something he never had. The moment he fired me, the deal stopped breathing, and I was still holding the final switch alone now, when I stepped away from the table. The room did not rush to replace me. That pause mattered. Chairs stayed still, pens hovered, then slowly lowered. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable, like air pressure changing before a storm. Warren Kest cleared his throat and moved into the space I had occupied. Let's continue, he said, already flipping pages as if momentum could be commanded. No one responded. The documents in front of them remained open, untouched. A CEO across the table spoke first. Clause 17, he said evenly. Can you clarify enforcement across jurisdictions? Warren glanced down, scanning lines he had never owned. It's standard language, he replied. The answer landed flat. Another voice followed. And the continuity provision. A woman asked, who is responsible now? Warren's jaw tightened. He began speaking faster, circling words without answering them. The questions weren't aggressive. They were precise, and precision was never his strength. Around the table, small movements began. A folder closed, a pen capped and set carefully aside. I watched from a few steps back, saying nothing. Silence was doing the work for me, behind the chairs. Interpreters exchanged glances. One removed her headset and gathered her notes. A legal advisor followed, murmuring something into his phone as he headed for the door. The sound of it opening carried farther than it should have. Warren tried again. We're aligned on the commercial terms, he said, louder now. There's no reason to slow this down. No one agreed. No one disagreed. They simply waited. Then, a man near the end of the table stood. He closed his folder with care and looked directly at Warren. Without the named liaison, he said. Calm and final. We withdraw from negotiations. The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. Chairs began to move. Others rose, collecting documents that would never be signed. The room emptied with quiet efficiency. I turned before the last door closed. The temperature hadn't changed. The power had. It had simply shifted away from volume, from authority, and settled permanently in restraint. Certainty and collective. Deliberate silence there, one by one. They stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with the quiet certainty of people who had already decided. Chairs moved back, folders closed. Each departure felt deliberate, measured, irreversible. Warren Kest finally reacted. Sit down, he ordered, forcing authority into his voice. This meeting isn't over. No one listened. He tried again. Sharper now. We're proceeding. Legal can resolve any technical gaps. The words echoed without landing. I remained where I was. watching justice work without spectacle. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence unfolding exactly as designed. A lawyer near the doorway spoke into her phone, then paused. Listening. She looked back at Warren and shook her head once. The memorandums were never executed. She said plainly, without the final authentication, there is no binding agreement. Her tone held no drama, only fact. Warren's confidence fractured. That's impossible, he said. We have signatures. She didn't argue. Draft signatures. She replied, legally inert, around the table. Remaining CEOs gathered their belongings. One said quietly, we'll revisit this when governance stabilizes. Another didn't speak at all. They simply left. The room thinned until only Warren, a few staff members, and the consequences remained. He began issuing commands that no longer carried weight. Call compliance, get IT. Override it if you have to. The desperation finally surfaced. That was when the system responded. An alert sounded from a laptop on the table. A notification flashed. Then another. An attempt to bypass final authorization had been logged. Automatically flagged. Automatically forwarded. I felt the smallest release then. Not triumph. Alignment. Warren Kest hadn't just lost the deal. He had created a record of interference that would outlive the meeting. $2.9 billion hadn't vanished. It had withdrawn. I didn't smile, didn't rush, didn't look back. Satisfaction stayed contained. Professional. Deserved. This collapse wasn't loud or emotional. It was procedural, documented, and irreversible. Justice arrived without applause, without witnesses needing explanation. In that silence, I understood something. Rare systems punish arrogance far better than people ever could when responsibility is written into contracts rather than shouted across conference tables by executives. At this point, the question is no longer what happened, but what Warren Kest will do next. What do you think if you think he'll blame subordinates, legal issues, or a technical error to save himself? Comment number 1. If you believe he'll admit his mistake and take responsibility. Skip comment number 2. Your opinion isn't just a prediction, it reflects how you view power, responsibility, and justice in the business world. Chaos didn't arrive loudly. It crept in through raised voices, hurried footsteps, and commands that no longer landed. From the hallway outside the conference room, I could hear Warren Kest trying to seize control of something already gone. This is on her, he said sharply. She created unnecessary complexity. A pause. Then his tone shifted. Legal miscommunication. Technical misunderstanding. We'll clarify. The narrative changed every few minutes. First, I was the problem. Then the system was. Then the process had been misinterpreted. None of it slowed the fallout. PR was activated within the hour. Draft statements circulated, heavy on confidence, light on facts, temporary delay, strategic recalibration. The market didn't wait for spin. Phones started buzzing. Analysts asked questions that couldn't be softened. Why had the deal collapsed minutes before signing? Why was the lead negotiator removed mid-session? Why were partners publicly distancing themselves? Warren paced, issuing orders that stacked on top of each other. Schedule interviews, freeze comments, no one mentions void. His voice kept rising, as if volume could restore authority. It couldn't, by midday. The damage had shape. Shareholders demanded explanations. The board requested documentation. Internal chats went quiet in the way that signals fear. Not loyalty. I watched it unfold without stepping in. That distance mattered. This wasn't my defense to make. Warren tried one last angle. We'll say she acted independently. He told his team that she overstepped. Someone murmured agreement. Someone else didn't answer at all. Then the email arrived. It was forwarded to the board within minutes. No subject line theatrics, no threats, just clarity. The CEO of one of the partner firms wrote plainly, "We do not conduct negotiations under unstable leadership. The removal of Vera Collins invalidated our trust. We will not return under current management. No ambiguity, no room to reinterpret." The room went silent after that. Warren stopped pacing. He stared at the screen as if waiting for another version of reality to load. This wasn't a scandal. It was a record, and records don't argue back. In that moment, I understood the shape of desperation. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks procedural, exhausted, and exposed. Warren Kest was still standing, but everything holding him up had started to give by the next morning. The company moved with a speed I hadn't seen in years. An emergency board session was convened. Closed door, no press, no talking points. I wasn't invited. And that absence told me more than any call could have. Inside that room, Warren Kest finally lost the protection of narrative. The numbers were laid out without polish. Timelines were reconstructed. Emails were read aloud. The board didn't ask how the deal failed. They asked who caused it. One director spoke first. You removed the lead negotiator during final execution. Another followed. You invalidated binding commitments across 13 firms. Each sentence stripped away another layer of excuse. Warren responded, but his explanations landed flat. Branding, speed, authority. None of it sounded like leadership when measured against a $2.9 billion collapse. Silence returned, heavier than before. This wasn't anger. It was assessment. Legal confirmed what everyone already understood. The memorandums had never activated. The attempted override was documented. The market reaction was underway. The damage wasn't theoretical. It was measurable. The vote didn't take long. Warren Kest was suspended from executive authority, effective immediately. Pending review. No speeches, no warnings. Just a decision entered into record. The board moved on to containment, to repair, to credibility. He was no longer the subject. Later that afternoon, a summary of the session circulated internally. I read it once. Halfway down the page, my name appeared, Vera Collins. Not listed as an employee, not as terminated staff. I was referenced as the principal negotiator whose removal triggered automatic invalidation. The language was precise, neutral, final. Seeing my name there shifted something in me. The board hadn't defended me. They hadn't needed to. They had acknowledged reality. Warren Kest lost the room. I gained something quieter. Confirmation. Power doesn't announce judgment. It records it. And in that record, careers were reweighted, reputations reassigned, and consequences distributed without emotion, without apology, without spectacle. Exactly the way systems correct imbalance when ego overreaches and truth finally has room to operate. That understanding stayed with me longer than the silence ever could, afterward quietly. When the calls started, they didn't sound like rescue. They sounded like clarity. The first came from a CEO who didn't bother with small talk. We want you independent, he said. Direct authority, full discretion, no title, no corporate leash. By the end of the day, 13 firms had aligned without a company at the center. They wanted a person, not a logo. I listened, asked questions, and for the first time in years. The terms were mine to define. The structure was clean. Advisory authority over negotiation, control over budget, final say on risk, no internal approvals, no sudden removals, no hallway ambushes. No one fires you, another CEO said quietly. He wasn't being kind. He was stating fact. Something loosened in my chest. The anger drained out, replaced by space. I wasn't reclaiming a job. I was stepping into a role that had always existed, just never acknowledged. Independence didn't feel rebellious. It felt inevitable. When the numbers surfaced again, I understood the scale. $2.9 billion wasn't gone. It was waiting. The alliance would relaunch without Warren Kest's company, without its politics, without its instability. We'll proceed when you're leading. The message read, simple, decisive. I closed my laptop and sat still for a moment. No one could remove me from this table. There was no badge to revoke, no title to threaten. Authority had shifted from permission to trust. The door Warren had slammed shut behind me had opened 13 others. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I smiled. Once. Quietly. This wasn't revenge. It was release. And the deal was alive again. Breathing freely. Finally built without fear. Without ego. Without anyone who thought power came from firing the wrong person at the wrong moment and expecting silence to save him. That chapter was finished. This one had room to grow and hold steady under pressure at last, with confidence and resolve, earned slowly across years of discipline, trust, and restraint. Now firmly mine alone, forevermore onward, into a future rewritten, clean, deliberate calm. And undeniably, mine today, onward, fully formed again, when Warren Kest disappeared from conference agendas. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. One week, he was listed as keynote. The next, his name was quietly removed. In finance. That silence means risk. I heard it from people who used to return his calls. We're reassessing leadership exposure. One banker said. Another was blunter. He's radioactive. The collapse of the $2.9 billion deal had rewritten his profile. He wasn't aggressive or visionary anymore. He was unstable. Doors closed the way they always do in this industry. Politely and all at once. No invitations, no panels, no private dinners framed as strategy. Power drains fastest when it stops being useful. Warren tried to speak. He published statements, attended minor events, repeated phrases about resilience and learning moments. None of it landed. The record followed him. He had removed the principal negotiator mid-execution and detonated the largest deal his company had ever seen. No explanation softened that. I never needed to confront him. Consequences handled it better than I could. Reputation, once cracked, doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. I knew when the realization reached him. It showed in a message forwarded to me by a mutual contact. Short, unpolished. He finally understands. The note said, understands that he hadn't fired an employee. He had dismissed the structure holding everything together, while his world narrowed. Mine expanded with precision. A final contract sat open on my screen. Clean and unambiguous. I wasn't listed as staff, consultant, or temporary authority. I was named lead. I picked up the pen and paused. Not out of doubt, but awareness. This signature wasn't defiance. It was alignment. Warren Kest lost power the moment he misjudged where it lived. I was about to sign with full authority, not because I survived him, but because I had always been the foundation he never saw. That truth followed me into the room, steady and earned. As I prepared to lead forward without noise, without fear, and without asking permission from anyone ever again, because systems remember foundations long after titles collapse under pressure, alone in silence. I sat at the head of the new table, not elevated by ceremony, but by clarity. The room was larger, quieter, and built for decisions that didn't need proving. When someone asked, "Are we aligned?" all eyes turned to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't revisit the past. "Proceed," I said. And the system moved exactly as designed. No theatrics, no revenge, just process doing what process does when ego is removed. I watched documents pass, questions form, answers land. Every seat at that table existed by intention, not politics. I decided who stayed, who waited, who returned later. That wasn't power I had seized. It was power that had settled. Across from me, a pen paused in midair. I nodded once. Ink touched paper. In a room full of contracts. Authority doesn't shout. It signs. In that silence. I learned who truly decides when ink finally moves. What stayed with me after everything settled wasn't the collapse of a deal or the fall of a CEO. It was the quiet realization that real power is built long before anyone tries to take it from you. Skills, trust, and integrity don't disappear when a title does. They wait. And when pressure hits, they decide the outcome. This story isn't about revenge. It's about preparation, about knowing your value even when someone tries to erase it publicly, about understanding that systems, contracts, and relationships remember the truth, even when people pretend not to. The hardest part isn't losing a position, it's choosing not to lose yourself in the process. If you were in that room, what would you do? Would you react in anger? Or would you rely on what you've built quietly over time? That question matters more than the outcome. I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Your perspective adds meaning to this story. And if this resonated with you, a simple action goes further than you think. One subscription helps this story reach someone who needs it. One like or share might help another person rethink their own situation and choose courage over fear. By engaging, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping keep stories like this alive and helping someone else feel less alone. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.